The Zombies are an English rock band who were part of the British invasion that stormed America in the swinging 60s. The group was, and still is, led by Rod Argent, piano, organ and vocals, and Colin Blunstone with his unmistakable voice. The band enjoyed enormous success in the UK and the US, with hits including She's Not There, Tell Her No, and Time of the Season. Their 1968 album, Odyssey and Oracle, is ranked in the top 100 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. And I'm delighted to have Colin Blunstone as my special guest on today's show. I'm so pleased to finally meet you after 50 years.
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Here's a quote. Blunstone's distinctive voice, angelic and deceptively strong, and key element of the Zombies' sound. Where did that voice come from?
When the Zombies first started in 1961, I was the rhythm guitarist for the first couple of weeks. I had no intention of being a singer at all, and it just happened by chance that Rod Argent heard me singing a Ricky Nelson song. I think it might have been Poor Little Fool. And he said, you know, you should be the lead singer. And that's just how it happened. It was just a chance thing. To a large extent, it's what you're born with. In later life, I did study with a singing coach, and he did help me considerably because we have a very, very solid touring schedule, and your voice has to be very strong to sing night in and night out. And often we'll play for 2 hours when we play a concert. And so I did learn a little bit of singing technique in later life.
I want to get to that in a minute, because you're talking about Ian Adam, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yeah.
Get to that in a second. Don't get ahead of me.
Okay.
Back in the 60s, everyone was trying to portray working class voices. All these singers were from working class. And you were saddled with a rather nice voice, so they put you into the upper middle class category. Was that in any way a hindrance?
I honestly think, with the benefit of hindsight, I think it was a bit of a hindrance, actually. And it really makes me smile, because I know a lot of the people who were claiming their working class backgrounds in those days didn't have working class backgrounds at all. And ironically, most of the guys in our band came from respectable but fairly humble backgrounds. If you live where we lived, this is how you spoke. And people, in a nice way, make assumptions about your background if you speak in a certain way. So, yeah, I've often thought about that. I don't think it helped us, really.
Well, it was also more prevalent in those days. I mean, in those days, there was a distinctive class structure, which these days doesn't really exist anymore.
Well, I think it was stronger then. I think it's still there to some degree, but not for me. Class makes me laugh. It really makes me laugh. And I hate snobbery, and I hate inverted snobbery. And I just haven't got any time for any of it. To me, there's good people and there's, not so good people. And I'd just rather be with good, interesting people, spend my time that way.
I hope you don't mind me asking you this, but I'm curious about this. Are you still a worrier?
I do worry quite a lot. You seem to know more about me than I do. I do worry quite a lot. I mean, for years, I was always looking for my proper job, and it was only about 4 or 5 years. So I was worrying in a way about what I was going to do with my life. And it was only about 4 or 5 years ago, I thought, I think this is it. There isn't going to be another.
When was this?
4 or 5 years ago. But no, I have always been a worrier. I don't really know why. I think you're just born that way, aren't you?
So, I mean, you're going to be doing a concert tonight. After all these years, I mean, I'm not trying to aid you in any way, but after all these years, you're not worried, you're not nervous.
I haven't thought about the show tonight very much so far, but now my knees are knocking. You see, now we've been talking about it. I think you do need to have a little bit of an edge. I can't perform without giving absolutely everything. It all falls apart. I can't go out there and give half a performance. I've either got to give it everything. And I think the band are all like that. It is a really kicking band, and it's a very high energy show.
Your influences were Little Richard, Elvis, and a lot of the rockers back then. I've never really personally seen it manifest itself in your music. So how did that music come across in the way that you were writing or the way that you were singing?
Well, all I would say is Little Richard, Elvis, and Chuck Berry were the first artists that introduced me to rock and roll. And I mean, that was in the late 50s. by the time the band came together, we were probably looking at other people as well. I mean, particularly Ricky Nelson for me, Buddy Holly. And not too long after the time when the band first came together, guys in the band started writing their own songs. And of course, incredibly influenced by the Beatles. So you might find more evidence of the Beatles in our early music. But Little Richard sort of, I think for all of us, got us interested in rock and roll in the first place.
As a singer gets more mature, the voice changes, and you fine-tuned your voice with the help of the late, great voice coach, Ian Adam. He helped you strengthen your voice and make it more accurate, as you put it, and he also said he widened your range. Did that change the way that you sing your classics?
Yeah, I think it did a bit, actually. My voice was a little bit fragile before I studied with Ian. I think it made my voice more accurate and certainly stronger. The important thing is I have a high voice, so there's a lot of strain on my voice. And maybe without that coaching, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing now. Having recorded in those keys, you then have to go out and do it night in and night out, and it can be challenging.
Does whiskey help in any way?
I don't know. I don't know about whiskey. I will say that when I'm striking open my singing kit, there's usually a beer that comes out. I do find a beer helps. Whiskey might be a little bit drastic because you don't know you've taken too much until you've taken it. You know, with beer.
Yeah, but it might be a good performance, but you wouldn't remember it afterwards.
I know. And you might think you've given a good performance, but you might be the only one that's thinking that way. But with beer, it just loosens your throat a little bit, and maybe you lose a little bit of inhibition, and I think that's a good idea.
So in 1967, the Zombies recorded the psychedelic album Odyssey and Oracle, which included Time of the Season. Was that a typo on the cover, or was it intentional with the Odyssey?
Oh, it's an absolute mistake.
Oh, it was?
A definite mistake. It was a painting done by somebody called Terry Quirk, who I went to school with, and Chris White, the original bass player in the band, went to school with. And I sometimes think it might be something to do with the school we went to, because I can't spell at all. And obviously Terry Quirk can't either. And I never saw a rough of the sleeve, but Rod Argent and Chris White did, although we were touring and they just looked at a rough of it very quickly and they said, no, that looks great. And it wasn't until they saw the finished thing that they immediately realized that there was a spelling mistake in it. But by then it had gone to the printers. But the twist for me is that Rod invented a very lame story about it, that it was done on purpose. And it was a play on words, and that the word ode was very important because it meant this and it meant that. But he told me this story. He told me it. And we were doing an interview. I mean, we're talking about 1967 when this was done. We were doing an interview about 3 or 4 years ago. And he told the truth. It was a mistake, and they tried to cover it up. And I said, Rod, you've kept that secret from me for nearly 50 years. I can't believe it. So I thought it was done on purpose for years, but it's a mistake. Terry Quirk is a great artist, but he ain't a great speller.
Well, that's a nice little bit of trivia for people to look into. You recorded the album at the Abbey Road studios, and your engineers were Peter Vince and Jeff Emmerich, who had just finished Sgt. Pepper. Did any of the George Martin magic wash over them and flow into Odyssey and Oracle?
Oh, I think absolutely. First of all, Abbey Road was the best studio in the world at the time. And I think the engineers working there were the best engineers. And you just mentioned Jeff Emmerich and Peter Vince, wonderful engineers. We were so lucky to work with them. There had been quite a few advances that had been made while they were recording Sgt. Pepper, and we benefited from all those technological advances that had been made. And also, I think they just were their heads were in the right place with sound. And we just really benefited. Literally, the Beatles walked out of the studio pretty much one day, and we walked in the next day, and we were picking up percussion instruments off the ground.
Well, Rod picked up a mellotron, didn't he?
This was the most important thing, that they left a mellotron behind, and there's a lot of mellotron on Odyssey and Oracle, and it may be that wouldn't have happened, but because it was there, we had the opportunity to use it, and I think we were incredibly fortunate to be in Abbey Road at that time, and it was very unusual because we were signed to CBS, and Abbey Road is owned by EMI, and traditionally only EMI artists worked in Abbey Road, and I've never really understood how we were allowed to work in there, and no one else knows the answer to that. And up till that point, I don't think anyone who wasn't an EMI artist had worked at Abbey Road. So we were just very lucky.
There's an elite club of 60s artists whose music never dated and remains as relevant today as it was 50 years ago. What special ingredient was added to your songs, do you think, that keeps them as fresh and as relevant today?
Well, we discovered that we'd got two very prolific and quite sophisticated writers in the band, in Rod Argent and Chris White. And I think they've played a huge part in making the Zombies still relevant today, because their songs do sound as fresh today as they did when they were first recorded. And that's just a gift. It's a wonderful gift to have. They're both sensational writers, and we were very lucky, because when the band started, I had no idea that they could write songs, and I don't think probably that they knew that they could write songs. It's just something that happened. And I think it was one of the most important components of the Zombies, the writing of Chris White and Rod Argent.
And that was true, though, of all of the groups, the artists who have survived those 50 years. They all wrote their own material.
Yeah, it's terribly important. First of all, it gives you freedom, because trying to find really good songs is very, very difficult. And secondly, it gives you credibility, because you're not just singing other people's songs. I mean, it's so much deeper artistic experience if you're performing songs that you've written yourself. I'm not at all surprised that the artists, with one or two exceptions that have lasted through the years, are all artists who write their own material. In the UK, the two exceptions are Cliff Richard and Tom Jones, and they're the only two I can think of.
I just wanted to mention there's a 40th anniversary live concert of Odyssey and Oracle, and it's available on CD and DVD. And I'm going to give you some website information in a minute. Now I want to get onto the current CD. How would you describe your music then versus your music now?
Well, I think it's very similar. It's quite simple what we try and do. I mean, amazingly simple, really. We try to write the very best songs that we can and record them in the best way that we can. And we've never been particularly driven by trying to record a hit record. We've never really thought of it that way. We've always thought in terms of what we do is our craft, and we're trying to improve our craft all the time, trying to improve our songwriting, our ability to record, and our ability to perform. And we've always thought in that way from the 60s until now.
And I've never known really how to categorize or pigeonhole your music, which is great, because I don't like people pigeonholing me, and I like people to be as diversified as possible. But on the current album, which is Breathe Out, Breathe In, it seems to me to be more geared towards a jazz element than your previous music.
Well, I think there always has been a jazz element with the Zombies, and I agree with you that I think the Zombies are very difficult to pigeonhole. And again, I think that in some countries that was a disadvantage for us, because radio stations do like to categorize what kind of music they play. And if you don't fit into their kind of music, then they won't play you. And the Zombies always absorbed influences, as we said before, from the greats of rock, but also from all kinds of music, from classical music, from modern jazz, from the blues, and from rhythm and blues. You can hear little nods to all those categories of music in everything we've ever done. And it does make us difficult to categorize. I completely agree.
There's several websites people can go to there, and they're all very difficult to remember. There's thezombies.net. There's Colin Blunstone.co.uk and rodargent.com. And I will finish this interview with a piece of music off of your current CD. Now, I've chosen a piece, but if you prefer something else, you can tell me. The track that I really, really love is called Shine On Sunshine.
Okay, no, I mean, I think that's a beautiful song. Funnily enough, it was written some time ago, and it was, first of all, recorded by Rod's second band, Argent, but he practically rewrote it. A lot of the chords are different, and it was a song that he felt he wanted to get more out of, and he thought he would really love to have a second crack at it, and so we did. And I think it's a beautiful song, so it's a good choice.
Excellent. Well, Colin Blunstone, you have got, how many more cities have you got? About, I counted, 30?
On this tour?
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't know. There's about...
I take one evening at a time. You know,
I don't want to make you nervous about that, but I think there's about 30. But you're going all over the States. So people who are listening to this outside of Philly can go to your website, can't they?
Absolutely. All the dates are on there. And this particular part of the tour, we're staying mostly in the northeast of America. We've already toured through the south, and then we're coming back in the fall to go to the west coast. So we will have toured all over the States.
Colin Blunstone, it's been a pleasure. It was worth waiting all those years to talk to you.
Wow, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much.